My name is Marion Wingfield. I work at the Ames Free Library. This is our master class online where we invite masters to talk to us about what they do so masterfully. Let's put it that way. But anyway, I would like to introduce Kate Kleiss, who just came on. She is a writer. She writes children's books. She's won so many awards for her children's books, which she illustrates with her sister illustrates with her. And she's been a guest several times at our Queset House as writer in residence, and she's delightful. And she recently ran workshops on how to write your obituary, which I was a little skeptical of at first, but she had people streaming in from all over. It was an amazing way to think about your life and how to tell people how you lived your life. It was really great. And the other person I'd like to, and then I'll come back to the two of you. Kevin Friend is the director of BCN Productions. He writes documentaries. He has all kinds of films. He writes for sports programs. He's a filmmaker. And he has recently, with Kate, produced a movie, and the executive producer was Bill Ames, who I thought would be here. Written a film, which many of you have heard of if you haven't seen already, Borderland, The Life and Times of Blanche Ames. Mm-hmm. And this film, if you haven't seen it, is a treasure. I went into it not expecting too much, and I was completely bowled over, so I am thrilled to introduce these two to you. They will be talking to you about the process of writing a documentary using the materials they had. And afterward, you will have a link to the film. So, and it's a limited time only. It's not going to be too long for you, but please see the film if you haven't already. And Kevin and Kate, please take it away.
Marion, I love your low expectations. That's the secret of our success. Low expectations.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So
Kevin, I think, Kevin, you should start because you're the one who got this wrong.
You're a better speaker than me, Kate. You can take it one to one, or I can jump in anytime. Okay, I'll start. I get the luck. I'll start. So I guess the reason why we're all here today is to learn a little bit about how to do this, I guess, for yourselves. So if you have an idea to put together a project or a documentary, I think that's the purpose for us meeting today, is to talk about how you can go about doing that, right?
Yeah, and I'm assuming there might be some people who possibly don't want to write a documentary, but it's always nice to be able to chronicle someone's life, either maybe for a retirement party or a memorial service, or I'm thinking of my mother when she turned 80. We didn't make a documentary because she would not have liked that, but we put together a little something for her that I can tell you about later. But everybody, I mean, a life story, it seems like such an overwhelming thing to do, but I feel like we all end up doing it for someone in our lives. And maybe you want to do it for yourself, write your autobiography. So there are ways you can do it. I generally handle the words. I'm a writer. Kevin is much more visual than I am. And the two of us came together on this project, I'm so eager to hear. I don't know anything about how Kevin works, really. I mean, I know how I do my job, but Kevin, how did you start on this project?
Sure. So documentaries in particular, but basically for almost all the projects that we do, at some point, I think what makes something a lot more interesting is to have as much as much material to work with in the first place. So we call that we usually call that B-roll. So that's like a general term. So it's like kind of a gathering of B-roll. And in this example, we gathered B-roll for sure, but a lot of that came in the form of pictures, photos, things like that. So I think to make a great project, the more material you have, obviously, the more interesting it will be. Because also even in this example, we did a lot of interviewing. So the interviews were definitely another aspect of a documentary, because the interviews help tell the story that you want to tell. But you don't want to have all what we call talking heads. So in order to eliminate the talking head factor, the more pictures and B-rolls that you have, the more interesting it becomes. So a lot of times, you start with an idea. So in this example, we started with the idea of making a documentary about Borderland, and it turned into it was kind of an evolution. So as opposed to other types of projects, you can start with a specific idea and write a script, and you're basically shooting specifically just for that script. But when you're making a documentary, it's really much more of an evolutionary process, where you're really not sure at the very beginning how it is going to evolve and what it will look like at the end. It's just an idea that you have, as opposed to nonfiction work or specific corporate or many other types of video production. You know pretty much at the beginning what it's going to look like at the end. But documentaries, you really don't. What you're doing is you're sort of like an outside observer, and you're going to gather information and about the story. So that's what we did in this example, the Borderland, and so it turned from Borderland, which was going to be about the park, and it turned into really a story about Blanche Ames. So it actually went from Borderland to Blanche and Oaks to Blanche, and that was kind of the evolutionary process of it. And then even within that context, when we started talking about Blanche, we had many things to say about Blanche, because I think first and foremost at the beginning it was Blanche the artist, and it turned into like Blanche the activist, and it turned into I think when Kate and I started discussing what was the most compelling part of the Blanche story, and part of that was predicated on the fact that it was the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. So that really kind of affected us, and we started leaning towards that. And then it had another kind of moment of evolution when we found out that Blanche was, so it became Blanche the artist to Blanche the suffragist. And then it was like, whoa, Blanche the women's advocate, the women's health issues and birth control, which, and a lot of that was buried. We had no idea about that when we first started it. So getting back to the early part of this, and it was just gathering. So basically gathering information, and that comes in three forms. One was the connecting with people. So we wanted to connect with her family. So we were very fortunate. A lot of that, Bill Ames, who was the executive producer, he was able to open some doors for us where we were able to connect with members of the Ames family. So they were much more open to somebody they didn't know showing up with a camera and having that conversation. So you just like to kind of have that conversation where people feel comfortable. So you're not barging into their world, but you kind of slowly, putting your toe in the water a little bit, and they get to know who you are a little bit. And so it's very important to be able to have a conversation this interview process. So it can be intimidating with most people. And what you need to do is like carefully work your way into their world by, you definitely want to have a set of questions that you want to get to, but you have to read the room and you have to understand, you have to work your way into their life a little bit slowly. So the interview can be good. It can be a good, productive interview, and not something that, like you could walk away from an interview with nothing if you don't have like a personal connection with the people that you're talking with. So basically, during that interview process, you are in a discovery process. So you're discovering things that they are saying and making more connections during that conversation. So again, we're just gathering. We're gathering the story. We're finding out more about the personality of Oaks and Blanche. And yeah, so that was the first part of it. And then I guess the second part of it is gathering. So you have the talking heads. Now you want to get the pictures. So in this case, we were really fortunate to discover the Sophia Smith collection at Smith College. And that was basically where Blanche had left her very abundant archives, very carefully and meticulously maintained photos and letters and such. And also the people over at Borderland, Paul and Buck over at Borderland, were able to also share with us their trove of photos. So now we were able to listen to the stories and put the photos together. And at this point, we had enough to say, okay, we know what we want to say, and I think that's where we were fortunate enough to have like a professional writer, Kate, who she's not just a writer, she's somebody who, and I didn't know this at the beginning when we were having the conversation, like she knew who Blanche was, and I didn't even know this. Kate, we started having this, and all of a sudden I realized like Kate knows almost as much or more about Blanche than I did. And she brought this like professionalism and this excitement and this exuberance. And also, we were able to work together, not always having the same sense of where we're going with the story, but we were able to bounce back and forth. And so that was like a really great, something that developed that creative process with Kate. And having done other projects, I'm not just trying to, plug Kate on this, but like, because I've been in other projects where you're trying to develop something, and if you're not like in sync or have the chemistry with the people that you're trying to collaborate with in the project, it won't turn out as well. Okay, you can pick it up there if you want.
I was going to say, I also brought a little estrogen to the table.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you're telling a story about a woman who spent her life working for women's rights, I told Kevin and Bill, you better well get yourself a woman on this project. But she was such a delight to get to know. And for those of you who are embarking on telling a life story, just from the writer's perspective, I think it's really helpful to think of 3 piles. I tend to work in piles. I know other people might be neater than I am. Some people like files on your computer, but I'm a pile person. And as Kevin was talking about gathering information, I always think of that as the facts stage. I think the first thing that's helpful to do is just get a chronology together of the person's life. Even if you think you know it, just get it down in bullet points, so you're not always going back to look up when they graduated college or what year they were born or when they married or when the children were born. And I pulled up the one I did on Blanche. I think I have like 41 bullet points. And they're like the who's and the what's and the when's. And as we all know, the facts are not the juicy part. They're not the most interesting part of the story, but you kind of have to get all the facts in order. And as I say, I like working in just a Word document in bullet points, but I know some people who use index cards and just, put them in a box and put them in order. I think life stories are almost always best told in chronological order. An editor once told me that nobody likes flashbacks except soap opera directors. So no flashbacks, just tell the story in order. The editor also said, no flashbacks, no prologues, which I think is good advice. And then once you get all the facts together, you realize that you're not going to use all of them, but they kind of help you build the next pile, which I think of as the truths of the person's life. And this is what Kevin was talking about. This is where, and these little juicy nuggets are more like the hows and the whys. If we know, for example, that Blanche married Oakes in, what year was it, Kevin? 1900. You know, the next pile is you want to know what kind of wife and mother she was. And that's the kind of thing we got through her letters to Oakes, because they had some rough patches where Blanche was basically telling Oakes, you know, get your head in the game. I'm not doing this alone. I'm not raising these kids by myself. You've got to help me out. And Kevin, we loved going through those letters, you remember? And just hearing kind of the drama in their marriage. Another thing that you would put in the truths pile, I mean, I have in my chronology about them building Borderland. But what you want to know is the kind of juicy story. And I also think of these as the stories you tell around the Thanksgiving table. The story of how it's not just that Blanche designed Borderland, it's that they hired an architect, but the architect came back with a budget that was, they wanted to build a house for $50,000, and the architect kept coming back with $100,000 plans and much more ornate than Blanche wanted. So she said, she fired him and said, I'll do it myself. And so those are the kind of, and you don't need 40 of those. You need maybe 20 of those. Don't you think, Kevin?
Well, yeah, I mean, the more the better, and then you can decide which are the best. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But those are the things. I mean, the facts are kind of your bricks, but the truths are the juicy stories that really give so much more humanity. You know, for those of you who have not seen the documentary, you know, everybody knows that Blanche was a big proponent of birth control. But then when you hear her granddaughter talk about her standing on Commonwealth Avenue in Boston with a hand-carved wooden penis and teaching women and men how to use a condom, I mean, that's a much juicier bit of information than just the fact that she believed in birth control, right?
Yeah, so let me just jump in real quick, Kate. It's so true, you want to go in chronological order, but you also want to have a hook at the beginning of your piece. And that was our hook. So you want to have something in the first minute of whatever you're doing it's going to make people be very interested in what's going on here. It's going to make them raise their brow real quickly and go, oh, you know, this is going to be interesting. So I just wanted to jump in.
I think Stephen Sondheim once said that people decide in the first 3 minutes of a play, and I think the same as in a book or in a documentary, people decide very quickly whether they're with you or not with you. So you're right, you need something really juicy at the beginning. But another way to get at these truths, as Kevin was saying, interviews are good. Anecdotes, quotes, things that they said, and you can get all these through interviews with people, with letters, diaries, photographs. I mean, sometimes a picture tells so much. How else, Kevin, where do you think we found some of our best truths about Blanche?
Well, I think when we were, as we're piecing together, like sometimes we would have something that was in the narrative of the story, and then we found somebody who said what we wanted to say. So it would be great to have somebody else saying what the truth was, what happened in their lives. So if you can have somebody say it means a little bit more, because there's a character, there's a personality behind whatever the truth is, whatever that little fact is. The other thing is, you get sometimes in the interview, you get a little look at the end of what somebody says. Like when Oaks Plimpton, I'm sorry, when Oaks Plimpton says about he was bad around the kitchen table or something like that, and then he kind of looks away, and you just you let that shot linger just like for 2 seconds, and then you move on. So when you're able to pull in a smile or a laughter or a colloquial line or a cliche or a look from somebody who's trying to tell the story that you're trying to tell, it just connects, I think, a little bit more with your audience.
Kevin, if it's a story I'm thinking of, it's Blanche's grandson saying that his table manners were so bad that Blanche would put a mirror in front of him at the dining room table so that she didn't have to look at him and so that he could see for himself how bad his manners were. And then he says the story, and then as Kevin says, he kind of like smirks, and he looks like he's about 6 years old getting in trouble at the dining room table, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So
those are the golden moments when you're putting it together. There was a lot of those golden moments, like when Joni, the example that you used earlier about her carving, she laughs right after she says it, and so it's great because you just linger on. Those are those moments that I didn't know that happened. We're piecing together this documentary, and it just what it does is it makes your documentary subject feel more like somebody you might know, or feel more human and less less like an antiseptic educational piece. It makes it feel more makes it
everybody in this Zoom room has the same equipment I do to write a life story. Everybody, I'm sure, has pen and paper and a computer and a printer and this sort of thing. Not everybody has your nice camera and editing suite. So say you're doing this for a family member and you come across these beautiful archival photos. And if you didn't have your camera, how would you do it? In our from a DIY standpoint, how would you do it?
Sure. Okay. So I think what you need to do is you need to find a way to digitize your photos. So that is in the simplest terms. I don't think you can piece it together these days without having a digital file. So if anybody doesn't know what I mean by that, just ask that question. But basically, you could take a photo and put it down on the table, and you could actually use your camera, the camera on your phone, if you have an iPhone or an Android or whatever, and you just literally try to take a picture with your phone, and then you can email. You can email all these JPEGs, all these JPEGs, email them to yourself, and import them into a file, import them into a folder on your desktop. And at that point, even with the simplest, like I know Google has simple ways where you can manipulate photo and images. So you can bring them into that kind of software and maybe brighten them up a little bit. But the important thing is that you basically are focused, that you get good focus on whatever photographs that you want to take. And a lot of that you'll want to be in a well-lit environment. You don't want to do it in a dark room. And you want to avoid glare, like glare from windows and such on your photo. But I think you can do almost everything that we're talking about. You can do it with your iPhone or your Android phone.
And Uma, am I right that if people have slides, like my family has 100,000 slides from the old days, you can convert them to digital files at Queset House, I believe.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, so that's fun for free, and put them on a flash drive. which is a nice way. And then you could get, Kevin, could you get a grandchild or a niece or a nephew or someone to put all of these images? Would they, what kind of software do they need on the, to make it into a film?
Yeah, so we edited Borderland on software called Avid Media Composer, and so that that would be a high-end type of editing system that you probably wouldn't be familiar with. But what you probably could get access to is iMovie. So anybody who works in the Mac environment, but there are very simple. I'm not exactly familiar, but I know that we just taught a course over at Stonehill, and a lot of the students, when we had to go into this virtual environment for teaching, a lot of the students edited their projects on iMovie, and it's pretty simple software that I think anybody could use and to create a family archive.
And of course, it could be in the form of a book too. I mean, years ago, I made an ABC book for my cousins and their side of the family. And I just took all of our fun family stories and made it an ABC book. I mean, mine was very homemade, but you could do it now with photos or with, have the grandkids draw pictures of all these funny things and just put it in an ABC format and go to Costco or Walgreens or Kinko's and have them print a book out of it, which would be very cute. Mm-hmm. That's a fun way to do it.
I think if you're going to do something like this too, you better, it's good to not do it alone. It'd be great to, like you just, mention having, a family member or a friend. But when you get into, if you're going to get into working with some simple software, it's great to be able to collaborate with somebody. And so if you're having an issue, it's just so often in my world, if you have an issue, you can always go to get a YouTube video that explains new software or techniques. But to have somebody that you can bounce the ideas off of, or if you're doing something about a family member, to have another family member helping you out with that process, it inevitably always comes out better when you're collaborating with somebody else.
Faster alone, further together. Isn't that our motto?
I guess.
I want to talk about my third pile, though, before we open it up for questions. You have your facts, which is like your chronology. We like the truths, which are like the juicy nuggets and the stories that you're going to tell in chronicle order. And then I think you always want to keep in mind the third pile, which is, and it's the hardest one to figure out, I think, is sort of the overriding theme of this person's life. And it's something that I don't think most of us think of for ourselves, but if you're telling someone's life story, it's kind of like the music that Kevin picked to go along with Blanche's story. It's kind of nice to know what the overriding theme is. And I think it's often expressed in a question. Marian, I'm sure you know that Carl Jung quote about, I wrote it down, the meaning of my existence is that life has addressed a question to me, or conversely, I am a question which is addressed to the world, and I must communicate my answer. And so I think as you're telling someone's life story, it's important, or it's valuable to figure out what question their life is responding to. Don't you, Kevin? Because I think once we figured out that Blanche's whole life, I think, was in response to the question her mom had about, like, is it possible for women to live in this world as easily as it is for men to live, And once we got that, it's like everything in her life was a response to that. Being able to vote, being in control of your reproductive rights. Everything, that's kind of the overriding thing. And you're not going to put that in the documentary, but it's kind of nice to know that the sort of through line of this person's life, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But that pile is the thinnest, because it's really just like the theme, the overriding question that this life is in response to. I think I see Mr. William Ames.
Yeah. Bill, you need to unmute it.
Let me just try and do that.
There we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, great to be here.
Hi, Bill.
Great to see everybody healthy and well. Yeah, that's a good point there, Kate. Of course, I look at it from a man's point of view, needless to say. And I see the Battle of Gettysburg and Ben Butler and the governor of Massachusetts and the Transcontinental Railroad, and I'm saying, let's set the bar. She's saying, let's set the bar a little higher here, you know? So I think it's a duality or a combo, if God may.
You know what? That's a good point. I got to jump in and just say that's a good point, because you do want to have balance. And I think I feel like you're never going to make everybody happy, but you do want to keep everybody engaged. So I think it's important to have balance in what, if you're going to do something that has a message behind it. Because you don't want to lose anybody during the process. So there's ways to carefully, craftably get your message across, in a skillful way, so people stay to the end, and that was so important, I think, in this particular documentary, because I think maybe the greatest point of the entire film was made at the very end, when when you showed Blanche's obituary in the New York Times, because I think that was really the moment in the film, which happened to be at the end. It was one of those aha moments, where it really felt like the message that we were trying to get across was made. But at the same time, her life was so interesting, with not just her mother and her siblings and the people that she collaborated with in her life, but also the great family that she came from, particularly Adelbert. I think his life is so fascinating, and I know that we wanted a balance, that we didn't want to make it the Adelbert show, but at the same time we get a feeling of who she was and where she came from by just the right amount of highlighting what her background was.
Yeah, she was a leader. I think that's what she was programmed. She says at Smith College, that great line was included. I told everybody what to do, and by gosh, they did it. That's a sort of an epiphany for her. She had that self-confidence and the sense of judgment that not to go too far in any direction that they follow.
So just jumping back into the master class aspect of what we're talking about, I think Kate, I outlined basically if you want to do it on your own or how to do it yourself. But I think getting back to something that's quite simple is just being organized. It's easy to stray when you're doing these. So having that outline, literally, I would have notes taped up right on the side of the computer screen when we were cutting this, or having it up on a whiteboard. But it's so important to have structure and organization, because you can stray, you can wind up going down a path, and a couple of hours go by and you realize you're kind of getting away from the story that you're trying to tell. And within the software of your project, or whether it's written notes, or I love the idea of those cards. What are those cards called? The little
Index.
The index
cards.
Yeah, index cards.
Index.
Simple tools like that really are helpful when you're trying to piece together something cohesive.
And I think, Kevin, don't you agree that the tighter and better it gets, the shorter it gets? So your first draft, you will overwrite because you'll use all these facts. And then as you get tighter and tighter, you'll realize what you can combine, and it gets shorter and it gets tighter. So yeah, your first draft will be your longest probably.
Right, absolutely. So, you know, I think right now what is released is probably our 7th version of what was our final cut. So I think the key is, if there's anything, if you're really serious about the effectiveness or how you feel about what it is that you're producing, if there's anything that's bothering you about the piece, ever slightly, sometimes it's subconsciously, it comes and goes and you never make the change. I would say if there's any shot or any part of what it is that you're producing that is bothering you have to fix it. You've got to either change it or add to it or rewrite it or get rid of it. Because there was always these little small pieces of the production that just wasn't right, but it wasn't glaring enough that we ever made the change on it. But by the time you get to the end, if you really feel strongly about it, you have to make the changes. You have to stop and take the time to make the changes on the things that are bothering you. And I know.
And the things that are bothering me.
Sorry?
And the things that are bothering me.
Yeah, right. And Bill. But at the end of the day, you have a collaborative piece that is awesome. And is way better. That's why I mentioned earlier about working with somebody. The piece that, if you have a good collaboration, the piece that you make together with people, going back and forth and you know, not always rosy moments, but at the end of the day, you have something that you can be very proud of.
Kevin, talk a little bit about the music, because I had very little to do with that, and I loved the music added. It's just such a nice layer and such a mood setter. How do you find public domain music, or how do you, if people are doing this in a private way, do they have to pay for it if they're just showing at somebody's, at a funeral service, for example? Can you use anything, or what's the thinking on that?
So all the music in Borderland is licensed music. So we actually do pay for it. We used a group called Gene with a G, Gene Michael Productions. And it's just a group that I had been using for almost 20 years. So I am used to the idea of listening to music for pieces, for production. So I could honestly tell you, I could tell within 5 to 10 seconds of listening to music whether I like it or not. So I would find something that in this particular production, I would find something that was period based. So it would be music from the early part of the century into the 20s and so on, the 40s, through Blanche's life. And so that's really how I picked it up. And it was just, honestly, it was just kind of a gut feeling of listening to music. The other part of the music that we didn't use, but I try to find well-known women producers from that period of time. And there was a woman whose last name was Beach. I think it's Beach. And she was a very interesting composer. So we did want to use her just to stay with the theme and the authenticity of Blanche's story. We wound up not using her because getting the rights for that particular piece of music became problematic. The other thing about music I want to say is we were like really fortunate to serendipitously connect with the musical director at Oliver Ames High School. And when we were able to gather those students in the library at Borderland, I got to tell you that it really was a magical moment for me. It was such a great feeling in that room, and it was really cold. We were very lucky to have a professional audio recording professional with us. And I just got to say that moment meant a lot to me, because I was thinking about how Blanche would absolutely have just loved that we were doing that. And even though we only used a little bit of their music, it brought some energy and excitement to the project. There's another story to the music, Kate, as you know, but we don't have to talk.
But what I love, Kevin, about the music is that you, as I was thinking of the theme of her life, you established this musical theme that you introduced early on. It's like in any good soundtrack in a film. And then we hear this, then we have, 40 minutes of her life story, and then it comes in again at the end. And by that time, it just sounds different because you know more about her. And it just adds another emotional layer that I think is really nice.
Well, yeah, I think music is one of those things that sometimes people don't think about, but it's an absolute huge factor in everything. I'm watching Ken Burns' country music right now. That's what I'm binging at home, and I'm not a country music fan, and I never have been, but I absolutely adore this documentary. I guess my point is, like, music is so important. I think with, just to go to that that higher level of production, you talked early, Kate, about how you have to have this like factual, chronological order of one's life activities, right? To make a comprehensive, cohesive presentation, because at the end of the day, you want to have something that is cohesive. I think what we did in Borderland is we had this musical theme, which happened to work. Well, we also had other layers, like we brought in her credo every time we were changing the subject. Instead of telling people we were changing the subject, we would bring on something that Blanche said and put that in black and white in words on the screen. So that's another layer that we used. We also used the layers of nature. We have this, late winter, spring, summer, fall, and winter again. So this basically this feeling of a circle, because in today's world, we are dealing with some of the same issues that Blanche dealt with in the process of our film. So those are like different layers. So even though you have your concrete beginning, middle, end of whatever documentary you're going to make, you can also have parallel layers of production that can also help piece the thing together.
Kevin, speaking of the music, one of the greatest, most effective sections I thought was when you had that headshot of the woman that looked like the Statue of Liberty. You remember that shot? She sort of had the crown and everything. And that
was an illustration.
Yeah, it was an illustration, but it was a similar concept. But I thought it was so effective because you had no music leading up to it. And then then it switched to that. And you had some perfect music in there that just drew you right in, because that's symbolic of Statue of Liberty, and even though it wasn't, but I thought that was wonderfully emotional.
I think sometimes too is having nothing can be effective as well. And what I mean by that is there was a couple of moments actually we started taking a lot of the music out after we had initially had it all in. Sometimes it's better to not have music. As much as we love the music, it's also important to to not override emotional moments in your film. And sometimes by taking music out, you can help accentuate certain in your film. One thing I like that we started adding towards the end of the film when we felt like we had our final cut was, and because nature was so important to Oaks and Blanche, we started adding sounds of nature. And, there's one shot in particular that I really like, and just to hear the rain falling at Borderland. And sometimes it's like at the very beginning, you can hear there's a snowstorm, you can hear the wind. So hearing, like when I walk around Borderland, or one of the that excites me about Borderland is just, that connection with nature. And that might be, the sound of wind or rain, or the birds and so on and so forth. So you might not be able to actually, those are things that you can actually add through, either you have it because you recorded it at RAD, or you can actually find the sound effects of these kinds of things. And little things like that, I think, can really add to a production.
I just want to mention that it's 2:45, and I want to give you all time to ask questions. When I'm putting together what you're telling me about doing it, how many of you here have seen the film? Can you raise your hands, or have you already seen the film? None of you. Okay, so it's a huge treat. You really need to treat yourself and follow the link after we hang up. But if anybody has questions, please go ahead and ask. Now's your time. We've got about 15 minutes. Anybody?
I don't even know how.
I have a question.
Yes.
What do you do if someone you're interviewing tells you something that is really kind of a good juicy tidbit, like you would say, Kate, but they tell you can't use it, and you really want to? What would you do if you found something out about the person that you probably shouldn't disclose, but it would add to the story?
Well, if you're doing this professionally and you want to have this broadcast, you need to show up with a waiver. So people sign off on it in the first place. However, if what you're saying is they signed the waiver, but they say something and they specifically tell you they don't want it in the production, then I wouldn't use it, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
Unless you really, really want it, and then you convince them to change their mind.
That's somebody else to say.
I used to work for People magazine, and this would come up all the time, that you stop recording, and then they tell you the best thing and tell you not to use it. And then you have to convince them that how good it is, and it's charming, and no one's going to get their feelings hurt. You might be able to talk them, change their mind, unless it's something scandalous that would be hurtful.
Right.
And then,
Leave it out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? So you struggled. The beginning, I remember this was about Borderland. And as you say, Kevin, it was an evolutionary process. You really went from one idea to another idea. When was it that all three of you felt it really was the film that you were making, and it was coming together, and you had got it? I mean, I know you were editing up until the last minute, but when did you all feel that you had the absolute essence of this film? Was it 3/4 of the way through, almost done? When did you feel so proud of yourselves? Because if you haven't seen the film, to me, it's like one of the best things I've seen ever.
Oh,
You must
so nice.
yourself with seeing this.
I don't know.
And was there a moment?
Well, I think actually I held it back. I didn't really want to show anybody until I'd say it was 3/4 of the way through. And then it was, you know, obviously Bill and Kate were the first to see the rough cut. Yeah, Kate or Bill, you guys can answer that better than me.
Say, when I go to a museum, I always walk straight past the landscapes, and I want to see a portrait. I want to see people. Maybe because I used to work for People magazine. I didn't work for Places magazine. I'm not interested in landscapes. I'm not interested in Monet's lilies. I don't care. They're pretty. I don't care. I want a story. A place does not have a narrative theme, and there's not a lot of conflict. If you want conflict, you have to go to people, and you have to go to relationships. Yeah. And while at first it was Borderland, and then it was Blanche and Oaks, and I'm afraid Blanche, her personality is just so big that you could tell the story of her being married, but she kind of stole the show, I thought. Bill, what do you think?
Well, I think talk about an epiphanal moment. I think it was early on, and every subject we identified that she was involved in was so robust. I mean, the suffrage, the marriage with Oakes, who was an interesting character. I mean, it just kept adding up. You know, finally I just said, this is like shooting fish in a barrel. You know? Can I say that, Kevin?
Yeah.
Because I mean, so many sort of modules were interesting and cut across so many different things like nature and Borderland.
Yeah.
Then you're talking to her father, was a Round Top. Her mother was an actress, and she was president of her class at Smith. And I mean, my God, it was. So that finally, I just said, we can't screw this up.
Right.
It's got to come out right.
Kate, when Kate and I were, you know, piecing together, you know, so Kate wasn't always around to see the process of it, and but you knew where it was going, you know. So, but because you physically were out of the state, you know, so but we kind of held back. But I remember the first time showing it to Bill, and I was a little nervous because it was like, all right, I'm ready to show you something, you know. But I felt like when you saw that the first time, Bill, like I could tell that, you know, you were pretty much moved by it. So that felt like, all right, we're doing something right here, you know.
Yeah. And I just always was a big believer in the troika of Borderland, Blanche, and sort of her accomplishment in the world she lived in. You know what I mean? That the Borderland had a certain central. Everybody has a house. Everybody has a lawn. Everybody has a woods that they chop through, and that's what, and raise their family. I mean, that's what Borderland was. So I think that touched a lot of, even though it was sort of an exaggerated example, that everybody could relate to that home, and reflected, you know, a lot.
Betsy, you have a question?
Oh, yes, thank you. I forgot. I would like to go back to the question of how you handle privacy of information, or should you use, if you're writing up about someone else, should you use their actual names, the people with whom you interview, or should you use pseudonyms or not tell their, how do you handle that? Is that strictly a waiver, or is that another way to handle that? I'm asking about and actually, you just raised the question. I don't know the answer.
Well, if they're going to be on it, they have to have a waiver. There's no way around that, and you don't want to be putting your time and effort into it if later on you can't use it. So there has to be some guidelines that, you know, when you step into it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
I have a quick question for Bill. Bill, this was about your family, and you have several dozen family members who showed up at the premiere. Were you at all concerned that you might tell a story that would upset one of them? Or, I mean, living descendants of Blanche, was that a little touchy for you at all? Or did you feel confident, or did you worry about it? How did you feel about putting out a film like this? I'm sure you got, yeah.
I was pretty confident that they were going to love it, because it's a story that had to be told. And, we were deep into it. It's timely, obviously, with women's suffrage and 2000 and the vote and all that sort of thing. And, all these little side things she was involved with that were big accomplishments. And I got a lot of nice emails back from her nephews and great nephews and all that sort of stuff. So I was pretty sure it was going to work. But I think in terms of let me jump in. I think for me the most fascinating time was when we went out to the archives at Smith College. I think I was part of 2 expeditions out there. And it's an old story, and for people who write books and make films, that you immerse yourself in primary sources.
Yes.
And there were you really get connected to the subject. And there were the letters she wrote, wrote to her fuel oil distributor complaining that he hadn't showed up, just things like that. Besides the sort of more, the women's suffrage stuff. But when you see her actual day to day, when she put out the forest fire, remember that, Kevin? She put out a forest fire at Borderland with got over her staff and rallied them, and they ran up into the woods. Just things like that. Connect. It's in the details, the old cliche. It's really connected me. I'm sure it worked for Kate,
right,
Kevin as well.
But none of it works unless you have somebody like Blanche, to rely upon for just the amazing things that she did. So
I would disagree. I think any life is worth chronicling and can be well told. And it seems like an overwhelming process as we talk about music and this, but I mean, if people want to do this, open a folder on your computer and start making a chronology and start just gathering these little juicy anecdotes, the things people tell around the Thanksgiving table. I think Blanche was a remarkable woman whose story we were honored to tell. But I honestly think everybody should do this. Don't you, Kevin?
Yeah.
Well, of course, Kate.
No, you're right, Kate. I guess I'm just talking about our film, like how she made it easy for us to produce a great film. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Everybody's life is interesting in its own way.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be. You don't have to have music in a documentary and film. Years ago, for my mother, she was turning 80. And we were taking her on a trip in a month or two. We wanted something for her birthday. And so we went to Lowe's and got a bunch of landscaping rocks. And we wrote, how your family stories after many years can be crystallized into like a word or two.
Yeah.
So we just had like 80 rocks and wrote like Wisconsin Dells, like our world's worst family vacation. And we put these rocks in a basket that she kept by her bed. And they were just 80 little, like all those little juicy stories in a basket of rocks that she absolutely loved. I mean, it sounds so hokey, but that's another way to tell a life story, as you're waiting to take her to Mackinac Island, in Michigan. But
yeah, I kind of like the Dells.
I like the what?
What?
Kate said she didn't like going to Wisconsin Dells.
Oh, Julie, you're from Wisconsin.
I have to say, it was 2 parents, 6 kids, 2 station wagons. And
yeah, sounds like my experience.
It was a disastrous trip. But anyway.
Well,
and then what's your takeaway? If someone wants to start on this kind of project today, what could they do?
Gather.
call Kevin.
Yeah.
No.
Call Kevin.
Gather your photos and we were so lucky to get some home video from the Blanche's relatives too. You know, little, I mean, pieces of just gold. You know, so. But I've even done that with my own family. We had, you know, literally over 1,000 photos in drawers all over the house and in the basement and in bins and everything. And what a great time to actually be able to gather all the stuff that you have. I'm sure everybody's been doing this, you know. Gather all the stuff you have. And I made little boxes. I have 3 kids, you know, but I'd have a box for each kid.
Right.
And then a 4th box that was family, and the 5th box was miscellaneous, you know. But yeah, man, you know, just basically gathering and organizing, and you're going to discover moments and memories that you may have forgotten, and you're going to find beautiful photographs that are priceless. And I think that's, you know, just organizing and gathering is a way to begin.
Don't forget your piles, right, Kate?
The what?
Your pile.
I love that. Piles.
And the storytelling, it pays to read someone like, I think I once read something by E.B. White where, you know, he finishes breakfast and, you know, 300 pages later, he gets to his garden. You know what I mean? I mean, the true master.
Woman, did you have a question?
I had a question only because ever since Kate said that there was an overriding theme to Blanche's life, despite all the many piles that collected. And I'm saying, I know Kate has this incredible ability to create a synopsis even in her workshops. But is this a Kate characteristic? Are we capable of taking our entire lives and finding an overriding theme? And how important is that?
I think it's something I read recently about how it's important to figure out what question your life is in response to. I don't think it's a Hallmark theme. I never look for themes when I'm reading a book. But I think lives do have a through line.
Wow.
And I think it's often a question.
Sorry, you're leaving.
You're blowing me away there, Kate.
Yeah,
okay.
Profound. And it's, by the way, it is 3:01. So I know we've signed on to 3, and this is a wonder. Thank you so much, Kate, for coming and doing this, and for writing such a fabulous film. And Kevin, thank you for taking the time to talk about the film and producing such an amazing film. And thanks to the executive producer, Bill Ames, for pulling it all together. It was just one of the amazing experiences of my life to see it premiered on February 22nd. And you can all watch the film. I believe now there's a link to the film if you've signed up for this video, for this Zoom session. So I would highly recommend that you do that.
And if the link is not there, Ian said he has your emails and will send the link out.
Yes.
Can I just ask how long it will be available? Is it just today, or is it, you don't know?
Bill?
It will be available through tomorrow night.
Okay, that's great to know. Thank you. Enjoyed this very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
well.
Very inspired. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Oh, and next week on May 20th on a Thursday at 2 o'clock, we're going to hear from a wine master. It's going to be something like Wine 101 from a sommelier. Please come on here, Tina Cantor.
I may be back.
Yeah, yes. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for raising